Square Enix revisiting Octopath Traveler after a few years feels a little bit like a victory lap over the success of HD 2D games. When Octopath Traveler was first revealed in 2017 and then released in 2018, the unique style made it stand out, conjuring visions of 90s JRPGs in a high-def way. Since the game's debut, Square Enix trotted out the HD 2D look for a number of other games, whether it was the tactical stylings of Triangle Strategy or the stunning remake of Live Alive. Now, after nearly 5 years, Octopath Traveler II hits the scene, promising marked improvement over the original while still trying to touch on the same magical, retro-inspired feel. For the most part, this sequel succeeds at improving on the original, but in some spots it highlights some of the weaknesses of the first game without dramatically improving the experience. Octopath Traveler 2 features 8 new playable characters, complete with their own stories that all settle approximately into the archetypes of the original's 8 characters. Some of them feel very different, like the warrior Hikari, a prince caught in a never-ending war he doesn't want to participate in, while the warrior from the original was Ulberic, an old knight from a lost kingdom. Others, not so much, like the hunters, who both have quests to find a rare monster or 3. That being said, the cast is very good with distinct stories. Twists and reveals throughout them hit the right notes, amplified by the sometimes over-serious but always very good voice acting. I'm a big fan of the scholar Oswald, who starts off in prison for his first 2 chapters and has a compelling quest for revenge after being framed for the murder of his wife and daughter. Casti, the amnesiac apothecary, might hit on some memory loss tropes, but the way the game presents her slow memory return is really neat. Even if some of the stories are kind of silly, like Partitio the merchant trying to get money to end poverty, or the dancer Agnia just trying to get famous. There's a good balance between drama and relief. Some of the plots are stronger than others, but nothing is bad. There is variety in the formats of some of the stories where there are multiple places to go for each chapter, making the individual stories feel a lot longer than they were in the original. The pacing is good, rarely requiring the level of grinding that I recall having to do in the first game. One of the complaints about the original Octopath Traveler was the fact that none of the cast interacted with each other, and that's unfortunately mostly still the case here. Their individual stories do not involve the other party members. You occasionally have some optional banter, but most of those feel like opportunities to make jokes or asides, not really adding to anything meaningful. The biggest attempt at solving this are shared paths, which put 2 of the characters together in their own quest. Largely, these are somewhat throwaway filler side stories. The best thing about them is how they make use of 2 characters' abilities in interesting ways. The shared paths seem to share a similar fate as sailing. In the middle of the world, there is a giant sea that, well, you barely interact with until the late game. You can buy your own ship and explore at your leisure, but all of the sea content is pushed off until pretty close to the end. Alongside that, there is a final chapter waiting for you at the end of everyone's quests. But while the more direct manner of concluding the overall story is a gigantic improvement from the semi-hidden finale of the original, it still doesn't come together in a way that makes up for the dozens of hours before, where everyone just has their own tales and lives their own separate lives despite the fact that you're all in a party adventuring together. While the ending might not fully pay off, the changes to combat and how you interact with the world have expanded in meaningful ways. The combat system continues to blend Shin Megami Tensei's press-turn battle system with Square's past work on the Bravely series into something that is reminiscent of those 2, but wholly its own. Each character is distinct, whether it is Temenos' clerk being focused on healing, or Throne's thief emphasizing daggers and speed. If you played Octopath Traveler, this battle system will be familiar, but the changes deepen the variety and make characters more interesting to use. You can once again mix and match secondary classes to help customize your builds, but now there is more individuality in the latent powers and combat impact of the path actions. Latent powers are special moves that are built up by breaking enemies and taking damage. They provide meaningful battle boosts, such as Partitio getting a full slate of action points, or Hikari getting to pull from a list of devastating attacks. Along with that, every character now has 2 path actions, which add to their combat variety as well. For example, the hunter named Ochette can capture beasts and use them at battle, as well as with her daytime path action called Provoke. That's where she can use her beasts to beat up townspeople. Her nighttime path action is Befriend, where she can give townspeople meat and get them to join her in battle. Every single hero has a pair of path actions now, though like before they fit into a handful of types, whether it's acquiring items, gaining battle support, or just putting a person face down on the ground. All of these new flourishes feel like they might overcomplicate a solid battle system, but it all fits together elegantly. As you often have to change your party up to progress through each character's story, I had a good deal of fun mixing and matching classes and equipment to try to make sure my various 4-party teams would complement each other well. Having those extra abilities and powers did a great job at making this process more engaging, with a better potential for variety. One of the joys of the daytime and nighttime path actions is that this game also adds the ability to, with the press of a button, change the time of day. It's a neat effect, seeing the sun rise and fall, and it's a great way to highlight how much the visuals have improved since 2018. HD 2D has come a long way, and while the visuals occasionally have some wonky lighting, the quality of the presentation is more in line with Triangle Strategy and Live Alive, showing fresher camera angles and a good variety of locales. While I'm excited by the visual improvements, I'm a little let down by the soundtrack. The sequel has a high bar to hit, since its predecessor has one of the best new soundtracks of the past few years. But Octopath Traveler 2's setlist does not have the same memorable earworm qualities of the original. By no means is it a bad soundtrack, it's just merely good, and I don't foresee it being the kind of soundtrack I still listen to periodically 5 years later, like I do with Octopath 1. On the whole, Octopath Traveler 2 is soundly an improvement on the original, but it's been quite a long time since that first game, and the impact of the visuals and ideas aren't quite as fresh as they once were. This game will not solve the issues people who bounced off the first game want to see solved, as the stories are still disconnected, and dungeons mostly amount to straight paths with treasure chests dotted along the way. However, if you really enjoyed Octopath Traveler and want a better, improved version of the combat and overall exploration, Octopath Traveler 2 will deliver that in spades. This is a strong RPG that I enjoyed my time with, but it's not a bold new step forward. Instead, it moderately iterates on an enjoyable formula to good success.
This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.